forward and read the X-rays. I'm going to project some X-rays. Then we will have some discussion on the given X-rays. We will just start with one single slide where I will just tell you that how and what is expected of you when you are reading an X-ray, when you are looking at X-ray, what is expected of you, what one wants the student to say about the X-ray. So in just one slide, when you are reading an X-ray, take your time, don't be in a hurry, don't jump to conclusions, don't jump to the pathology first, make your own sequence, decide in your mind before wherever you, this is not only for the exam, this is for your future life also, that you are going to be clinicians, practice your specialty, you will be seeing X-rays day in and day out. So if you form a sequence or a method in your mind as to how to look at an X-ray, whatever it may be, you can form your own sequence. You can decide that first you will see the soft tissue, then the bones, then the joints, or in the reverse way, in whatever way you want. So you make a sequence of your own in your mind and make it a habit of reading the X-ray in that particular way so as not to miss things and miss findings. Okay? So take your time, don't be in a hurry, don't jump to conclusions. Pathology at times, like a fracture will be evident, but there will be some other things which will be also evident in the X-ray which are not very obvious and which you are likely to miss if you don't observe the X-ray very carefully. To give you an example, when I used to work at Sanchetis, I used to work with Arora sir, and I used to always see whenever he would come to the theatre, the X-ray would be put up on the view box. He would just come and stand in front of the X-ray for like this for a couple of minutes. He didn't speak a word, nothing. He would just keep on staring at the X-ray. But then when I asked him, what? So he said, just keep on looking at the X-ray and you will definitely find something more than what is absolutely obvious to the eye, like a fracture or some deformity or something. So take your time. When you read an X-ray, what type of an X-ray you should say, whether it's a plain X-ray, a CT scan, an MRI or what, which part of the body and which side, if it is a limb, that it's upper or lower limb, and whether it's right side or left side, which part of the body, whether it is of a mature or an immature skeleton, name and date of the X-ray, name of the patient because you want to know that the X-ray belongs to the same patient that you are looking at. We are not, as I said, we are not only talking of the exam part, but this is also a training for your future when you are going to become practitioners and practice. So you should know that the X-ray you are looking at belongs to the patient that you are seeing at. Date of the X-ray is important because the patient might come with a 2-year-old X-ray, and then if you are not careful to see that, then you will be making your judgment on an X-ray which is 2 years old. Then come to the pathology. Look for contours, that is, if there are joints or bones, how a normal bone looks like in that particular area of the anatomical area of the body. If there are any obvious deformities and alignment of the bone and joints, then look for bone density. Always look for generalized bone density and the local or the part which is involved. Look for joint spaces, whether there is any increase or decrease in the joint space, whether there is any irregularity, congruency of the joint, whether there is any irregularity of the joint surfaces, epiphysis, and last but not the least, look at the soft tissues, that is the muscles, capsules and fat pads. Okay, so with this introduction, now we will start. Who is going to be the first one to read the X-ray? Yeah, somebody. Come on, volunteer it. They are going to be simple X-rays, which you see daily.
When you stand up and then let's go systematically one by one.
Okay, we'll do that. Because we just have about half an hour, na?
Yeah.
5 o'clock. Oh, so we will be able to do about 10 X-rays. Okay. So, yeah.
X-ray showing lower humerus, both forearm and wrist joint left side. With a ulnar reading with fracture of ulnar nisha. Hereditary is subluxation. Dystopedia. So fracture is not united.
Okay, you're done. Anybody would like to add anything to what he has already said? He has just said, he has said subluxation of the radial head. Okay, dislocated. But what? Dislocated where? Dislocated? Anteriorly. Okay? The fracture has not. Praveen? Okay, the fracture is still not united. The nail is still in situ, and there is a what has happened to the ulna? There is there is an angulation of the ulna. So what type of fracture dislocation is this? What would you call it? So this is a Monteggia. What type? Why? What classification? Okay, so there is a polar angulation of the fracture of the ulna, and there is an anterior dislocation. So that is a Bado's classification. So in the Monteggia, what you are expected to know is the classification, that is the Bado's classification, types 1, 2, 3, and then you are also expected to know the Monteggia equivalence. Okay? Anybody knows what are Monteggia equivalence? Yeah? No? Nobody? Okay, so read Monteggia equivalence. So basically Monteggia equivalence is when there is an isolated, there are 4 or 5 types. When there is an isolated dislocation of the radial head or an isolated dislocation of the, a fracture of the radial head or neck, or when there is a fracture of both radius and ulna with the fracture which is in the upper third of the radius. So these are all Monteggia equivalents. Okay?
Madhav, just go back to the XT.
Yeah.
Can you comment something more on the position of the nail in addition to the angulation, and whether there is a single nail or double nail? So these are two unusual things. You can see that there is a shadow into the distal part of the ulna, like wiper effect. The nail has moved from there and the nail has pierced the anterior cortex of the ulna. And in this particular AP view, you see there are shadow of 2 nails, not 1.
So probably they have been stacked nailing.
Because probably the marrow was broad, they have tried to put in 2 nails. So on a Monteggia, you will be asked a question, what will be the choice of fixation? Whether putting 2 nails is the choice of fixation, or you would like to do fixation by some other way.
Yeah, that was going to be the next
Yeah.
question actually.
Yeah.
So when we come to management, so is there a role of conservative management in Monteggia? Yes, there is. So I have mentioned it. The role of conservative management is there only in when there is a plastic deformation of the ulna or there is a green stick fracture of the ulna. Why so? The reason is the principle of treatment in a Monteggia fracture is achieving the length of ulna. Unless and until you do not achieve the length of the ulna, you are not going to be able to reduce the radial head. So now coming back to this X-ray, what is wrong in this? Correct. So the angulation rather than the length, the angulation has not been corrected and the length has not been achieved. So that is why the radial head has remained out. Okay? Clear? Okay. Next one. Who is the next one?
It is a plain X-ray of femur, right femur, AP and lateral view with titanium elastic nail in situ, with fracture line with hypertrophic callus at the mid shaft region. In a X-ray of a skeletally mature patient.
Okay.
Soft tissue affection. The fracture line is still visible, so looks like a hypertrophic non-union of mid shaft of a femur with implant in situ.
Okay. You have done fairly well. Anything anybody would like to correct? Yeah, so the implant, basically the implant in this, which you have said, this is not a titanium, this is not a TENS, it is not a titanium elastic nail. Why? Because you can see the ends here. Okay? See, this is not a TENS, these are Enders nails. Okay, so you have said this is a hypertrophic type of non-union. So what are the other types of non-union that you know? First define it define a non-union. How is a non-union defined?
Clinical, when there is no signs of, no clinical or radiological signs of fracture healing, after a specific time period for that specific fracture has been passed,
Which is
9 months,
approximately 9 months for most of the long bones, be specific.
which will not heal unless an intervention is done.
Anything more you want to add to this? To the definition? No signs of healing in three consecutive X-rays after 9 months. If there is no signs of progressive signs of healing, then you call it a non-union. With an exception of fracture of the neck femur. So in a neck femur, you can call it a fracture of a neck femur to be ununited or in non-union as early as 3 months. Okay? Yeah. So this is a hypertrophic non-union. So what are the other types of non-unions? How do you classify non-unions?
You only stand up and
So according to the callus, we can classify it as oligotrophic, atrophic and hypertrophic.
Okay. So this is you feel is a
Hypertrophic.
hypertrophic. Okay. What is any other classification you know of? Septic and aseptic. Okay. So either you can, if there is infection, it is septic non-union or aseptic non-union. Aseptic type of non-unions can be, as you said, hypertrophic. So what is the cause of a hypertrophic non-union? What is the failure?
Mechanical failure.
Yeah. So basically it is a mechanical failure wherein the fracture has not been immobilized properly. There is some movement occurring at the fracture. So the biology is intact, the body is throwing callus, but because of lack of stability to the fracture which has not been given, it leads to a... Okay, so anything else? Okay, so management, regarding management, advances, you should know about bone morphogenic, this thing, 2 and 7. And in septic non-union, you should know what is Masquelite technique. Does anybody know what is Masquelite technique?
Yes.
Yeah? Who said yes?
Sir, it involves the insertion of a antibiotic implanted cement block inside a spacer in the segment of the bone which is infected, the infected non-union region, and it allows for a period of 6 weeks or more. Then it helps in formation of a pseudomembrane.
Correct.
Follow that second stage, it is removed and bone grafting is done and it is removed.
Absolutely. So it involves a two-stage procedure wherein the first stage you excise the infected material and the infected bone, or you create a gap non-union there. You put a spacer with an antibiotic cement rod or a nail or something there. You allow a membrane to form, and after 6 to 8 weeks you go down again, remove that cement spacer, and then stabilize and put a bone graft. Sir.
X-ray. Why do you think this has not given stability? No.
No.
Hypertrophic
Why
is the
this implant
effect
has not
of
given stability?
Maximum
Why it has not given the stability?
maximum divergent at the fracture site.
Yeah. So you must, when you mention, you should mention that the reason for non-union is that the maximum curvature of the nail should go at the site of fracture so that it can really give a proper support. Because Enders nails are being used in adult bones also. But then because the method of use is not right, that is why this has gone into a hypertrophic non-union.
So basically what sir is trying to say is that the technique is wrong.
Yeah.
The technique is wrong. And also secondly, I feel that in an adult bone, one shouldn't be
one
using this
shouldn't
kind
be-
of an implant because of the body weight and the strong muscle forces. Even in TENS, they say that there is a limit of weight where you can use TENS. isn't it?
Yes.
So what do they say? What is the limit? Beyond what weight you should not try and use TENS in younger children or younger 50 kg. If the child is more than 50 kilograms weight, then it is not advisable to use a TENS because then it is unlikely to give that kind of stability that you would want in a bone like a femur. Anything else sir, in this? Okay. Yeah, who is next?
Radiograph of elbow, that will be left elbow AP and lateral view of immature skeleton, showing calcification in the anterior also.
Yeah, anybody would like to help him? Okay, hello, you can stand up and. Okay, in the AP view, you mean to say this? This is AP view. This one, this one. Anterior or posterior? Okay, posteriorly you can see a periosteal reaction, okay. But what is this?
Anterior humeral line is not.
Okay, anterior humeral line is going in front of the capitulum.
Refracted supracondylar.
Yeah, so what is this?
Myocytes.
That's a myositis ossificans.
See,
Okay.
in these kind of X-rays, you should just fire out that this is a immature skeleton and this shows myositis ossificans. You need not go on going round and round. You can say myositis. So that your further viva goes on, why there is myositis ossificans and
So then
what is
this-
the difference between a myositis ossificans and the callus. That further discussion which can give you more marks will stop if you go round and round like this.
Yeah,
So you
maybe
should
because
directly
when
hit on
this kind
this.
of an X-ray is projected, what the examiner is expecting you to comment on this, not the periosteal reaction, not the anterior humeral line,
Yeah.
because those are obvious things. The patient has had a supracondylar fracture, and what is expected is comment on this. So this is a myositis ossificans. Okay. So what is myositis ossificans? Definition. Yeah, quickly, because you have to cover at least 10 to 12 X-rays. Okay, so it is a formation of bone in the muscles. Okay, so extraskeletal deposition of bone in the muscular tissue is known as myositis ossificans. So what is heterotopic ossification?
Formation of laminar mature bone in the tissues
Other than normal age.
Other than muscle. So it is again an extraosseous deposition of bone. In muscle is myositis ossificans, but in other tissues like capsules or other tissues is known as heterotopic ossification. Okay. Okay, so myositis ossificans definition. Okay, so how do you treat this or prevent this?
In this particular case, in which muscle you think the myositis is formed? This is
Brachialis,
brachialis.
correct. Yeah, that is
Why
one more important.
you feel it is in brachialis? And you can still see some extra bone going right up to the radius, where there is an insertion of brachialis. So many a times you can see actually the myositis mass going and right up to the radius, it is extending in the whole length of the muscle. So you must be able to mention in which muscle you are getting this myositis.
So there is no definitive treatment as such for developed myositis ossificans, but the preventive therapy that can be given in the myositis is, one is a indomethacin. Indomethacin in low doses like 25 milligrams twice a day for 6 weeks post-operatively seems to prevent myositis ossificans. The exact mechanism how it does is not known, but there is one big disadvantage of giving indomethacin, which is correct. So it can affect the fracture healing. So indomethacin given for long period of time can lead to defective healing of the fracture. The second form of therapy is a radiotherapy. So especially in pelviacetabular surgeries, wherein there is a lot of dissection of muscles and this thing. So in these cases, to prevent the heterotrophic ossification, they give radiation. But the disadvantage or the big problem with that is, it has been observed over a lot of studies that the radiation which you give has to be given immediately post-operatively. That is, on the same day, that is immediate post-operative period, if you give radiation, a single dose of radiation, then that is supposed to reduce the incidence of heterotrophic ossification. And they have also found that the effectiveness of radiation to prevent myositis or heterotrophic ossificans decreases rapidly if you delay the giving of radiation. That is, if you give it on the first day, it is found to be effective. But if it is given on the say third or fourth day, then it doesn't have the same effect as it would have had if it was given on day one. So now this becomes a problem, because immediately after such a major surgery, it is not possible to shift the patient to radiation department and expose him to radiation. Okay, so that is why it is not being used regularly. Okay.
Just one point to discuss. In this myositis, suppose such case comes to you, then how will you manage? Just in one or two words.
So patient will be advised not to undergo any massage, any manipulation, and only active or active assisted movements should be done, no passive movements.
Yeah, so in the active form of myositis, when he is actually developing, that time the patient will present with pain, the area will be warm, and it will not be possible to give physiotherapy or movements. So at that time, what you should do is, you should start him on indomethacin, ask him to rest, not to mobilize vigorously, give ice fomentation, let the process settle down for a couple of weeks, and then start only active mobilization, no passive mobilization. In a developed myositis like this, there is no treatment by which you can make it dissolve or something. So you have to wait for the ossification to organize completely, say 6 months to 1 year time, and then if it is causing obstruction of movement, then you have to surgically excise it. Well, sir.
There is what Bhattacharya's operation, which we used to describe. And nowadays it is not very commonly done.
Yeah. Who's next?
The plain radiograph, both pre-op and post-operative.
Very good. Yeah.
AP and lateral of elbow, side.
Okay, side not good. Okay.
So in medial X1, medial.
Think properly what you say.
Medial condyle avulsion fracture. So medial epicondyle avulsion fracture.
Condyle or epicondyle? Epicondyle, correct. Okay. So what is the peculiarity of this fracture? It's a medial epicondylar fracture. What is the peculiarity of this fracture? This is a
fracture.
It is an avulsion fracture. So avulsion of what? Common flexor pronator origin. So okay, that is a common. So that is why it has come down so much, because with the pull of the flexor pronator origin, the fragment comes down here. So this is an epicondyle, not a condyle. A condyle fracture would go here into the trochlea. That's the intra-articular extension. Then it would become a condyle fracture. Okay, we'll go to this, we'll come back to this X-ray again. So this is a fracture of the medial epicondyle. Again, as I said, it's an avulsion fracture of the origin of pronator common. Basically what happens is, because of this pull and the valgus strain, it comes and gets incarcerated into the joint. So that is why the conservative treatment for this fracture is not possible. Most of the times it requires a surgical management. You have to take it out and then fix it. Fixation can either be with just 2 K-wires or a K-wire and a cannulated cancellous screw. If it is undisplaced, then you can conserve it. At times, if you don't have a compression screw going across the fracture, then it can lead to a non-union type of a situation or a fibrous union. But as said, fibrous union is not associated with any functional dysfunction. Okay, so these are the 1 or 2 special X-rays that you need to take. This is an axial view which you need to take of the epicondyle. So see this axial view of the humerus, where you will see the medial epicondyle which is clearly out and rotated, because basically the medial epicondyle, it is slightly on the posterior side. So in your normal projections, it may not be visible. Now in this X-ray, it is very clearly visible because it is clearly avulsed and displaced. But on a lateral, you are likely to miss this fracture. Okay, so that is why you take this axial view, which is a special view which you take. This is the position of the elbow, and this is how you direct the tube or the direction of the X-ray, and this is the axial view of the humerus, which will see this. You will show this epicondyle very clearly. Okay. Okay. Now coming back to this post-operative X-ray, I want somebody to comment if this is right or something is not right about this X-ray way. Yeah, somebody said something. No? Okay, that is okay. 2 or 3 threads outside. I mean, at times it may not be possible. Compression is there. I mean, medial epicondyles, because of the cartilaginous part you do. Correct. Absolutely right. So if you see the screw trajectory, this case is operated at our hospital only. But I would have liked the screw to go like this in the pillar. This screw has gone in the olecranon fossa. Okay. Even the AP and the lateral view you can see. So it has clearly gone in the olecranon fossa. That is not desirable. Okay, that is not the ideal situation. So what I need to do is, what would it cause? I mean, why even it's a olecranon fossa is an empty fossa. So what would happen? The patient will not get full extension. So what I need to do is, before I mobilize the patient completely, say after 6 to 8 weeks, I need to pull the screw out.
See, in these medial epicondyle fractures, I don't know how many of you have done it or assisted this particular fixation. How many of you have seen or assisted? You can raise your hands. If you haven't seen or assisted this fracture,
it's quite a common fracture actually in children.
what are the on-table difficulties that you face? See, because it has got this flexor pronator attachment, many a times getting this piece back becomes very, very difficult. And the piece is pretty small number of times, or like this it is having comminution. So you have to be very, very careful in handling this.
Yeah, not putting a towel shape on it,
Yeah.
you will likely to crush the piece.
Number two, as this has happened in this case, the trajectory of the implant that you are going to put, it becomes, because you are holding it with a clip or some instrument, the space which is available to you to put in your implant also becomes very limited. And that space actually many times, controls the direction in which you are going to pass your implant. So you have to plan your fixation in such a way that many a times you make a track into the proximal fragment before reducing the fracture.
Okay.
That's one
So
of the
that's a
tricks
very
that you have to
important-
use.
Very, very important tip that sir is given.
You have to make a track into the proximal fragment, and then it becomes much easier to direct your screw
In
into the
that
same track, and then bring the fragment close and just tighten the screw with a washer. So if you have to do this fixation, that is one of the important tricks that you have to follow. And never fix these fractures with only one screw. You must add one wire into it because
Rotation,
as you know
otherwise will
that
not
these
get-
are partially threaded screws. So the screw which is holding into the proximal part is of a broader diameter, and the part which is holding the fragment is non-threaded part. So with the muscle pull there will be always some element of rotation which will not allow the fracture to heal quickly. That is why you must add at least one additional K wire into this particular fracture so that it gives a rotational stability. So the implants used are right, but then the trajectory is not right, and you have not been able to get that compression because many times, as I said, the clip that you use to hold the fragment doesn't allow you to go in a proper direction. So these are some of the important practical tips that you have to remember when you are doing the fixation.
And second important thing is that what is here, what is important anatomical structure
Yeah.
that goes behind this. So you have to be very careful. You have to expose the ulna properly, retract it down, and then because then again, as I said, there is very little space there. A small exposure, you are trying to pass a guide wire, then a drill and a screw. So be very careful that you don't damage the ulnar nerve. We have not done that. Okay. Okay. Who's next? Come on, Alok.
Plain X-ray, APN, cross-side lateral view of immature skeleton with pelvis with both hips. Left-sided femoral head contour is altered. There seems to be fragmentation, radial joint spaces increased and fragmentation in the superior lateral part of the femoral head.
Why you are saying left side?
Okay, so from where you look at it, this appears to be left side, but then in that cropping, that picture probably side has gone. Okay, so continue. What's your diagnosis? Most likely Perthes disease. Okay. So not much to say about Perthes. Sandeep has taken a lecture in the morning, so I know he must have dealt it thoroughly. But this is the algorithm that you actually follow for treatment. And these are the two classifications that you use most commonly. Herring's classification, which tells you about the extent of the involvement, and modified Elizabeth Town's classification, which tells you about the stage of involvement. So these are the two important factors which decide as to what management you would be giving to a person of Perthes, patient of Perthes. And this is the algorithm. So these are all the things that you look at while deciding what treatment you want to do. Age, extent of involvement, stage of evolution, whether there is extrusion or not, and the range of hip movements. So these are the factors that would decide and whether you contain or do a surgery or you don't contain and treat it conservatively. Okay, so this is the algorithm. We will not take too much time on this. Okay.
There may be radiograph of pelvis with both hips of skeleton in mature patient.
Quick, you have to read two X-rays, this one and this one, of the same patient. Next, somebody else. Sit
Next
up.
person stand up. Next person stand up.
Okay, Tejas, come on. Somebody said something. Okay, so there are multiple osteolytic punched out areas seen in the both the femori, the pelvis, and the ilii, and APN lateral views of the skull, again showing multiple punched out lesions in the skull. So diagnosis, differential. Anything else?
Eosinophilic granuloma.
Mets, skeletal Mets. Okay, so these are the few differential diagnoses. Multiple myeloma, as you all know, it's a primary malignant tumor of bone involving the plasma cells responsible for protein manufacture. So, this is the monoclonal or the M protein which is formed by the plasma cells which get transformed to melanin. That is the when the patient develops multiple myeloma, the plasma cells start manufacturing this M protein or a monoclonal protein. That is why it is detected in what? Serum electrophoresis, where you look for the M band, and also by the Benz-Jones protein. So how do you do a Benz-Jones protein test? Why it is called Benz-Jones protein? Why it is called Benz-Jones protein? Because it was described by Benz-Jones. Simple. Okay. So how do you do the test? Correct. So you take the patient's urine, you heat it, and between 40 to 60 degrees, this protein coagulates and it forms into white clumps. And again, when you continue heating and the temperature goes beyond 60, it again dissolves. Okay. So diagnosis is mainly by confirmatory by. These are all indirect evidences to tell you about multiple myeloma. But confirmation is done by the bone marrow biopsy. Someone wants to add something.
Anything more in the blood investigations that you always find? Alkaline phosphate, something else? Uric acid.
Yeah.
You will always get high
Increased
levels of uric
high level.
acid in all the patients of multiple myeloma. So that's one more additional blood finding that helps you to come to a diagnosis. When you want to differentiate between multiple Mets and a multiple myeloma, if the uric acid levels are high, that goes in favor that this is multiple myeloma.
Okay.
There are now special tests available to determine the potential behavior of the tumor as well. They are expensive, but they are called markers, and with those tests we can make a very good prediction about the behavior of the tumor, whether it's going to be slow and or it's going to be very rapidly progressing.
Yeah. Next.
The anterior posterior view of the both forearm in the waistline.
With hand. Yeah. Widening of what? Cupping. Cupping. Diagnosis. Huh? Rickets. Okay. So this is a very simple X-ray. Actually, morning we have seen that case of renal rickets. So we will not delve too much on this. So this is a ricket. Again, radiographic findings. There is facial widening, metaphyseal cupping, which you should talk of, loser zone, decreased bone density, and bowing. So these are the few commonly found features which are seen on the X-rays. It is a metabolic disease. The nutritional rickets is because of the vitamin D deficiency, and the hypophosphatemia is a X-linked hereditary renal rickets. Okay. So treatment depending on the cause, surgical correction. What is important for you to know is that the timing of the surgery. What? When do you plan surgery? Deformity correction. One investigation you want to know before you give the patient the date for surgery.
Alkaline phosphatase.
Alkaline phosphatase. So you wait, because in the active form of the disease, the alkaline phosphatase levels will be very high. So the surgery is likely to fail. So you wait till the alkaline phosphatase levels come back to normal and then operate. Say anything else?
What about loser zone? Where do you see the loser zones most commonly?
Middle cortex of the femur.
And at what age group do you see? Do you see them in children or you see them in adults? This is an osteomalacia or adult rickets. That's the type of patients that you look for the loser zone, and the commonest area is either the calcar or the subtrochanteric area of the femur, where you see these loser zones. And what will be the presenting feature of a patient? And the patient comes in your consulting walking, and you can many a times suspect or diagnose that the patient has got osteomalacia. What's the typical gait of these patients? They have a typical waddling gait because pain as well as the proximal muscle weakness, that is one of the most important presenting feature. So the patient walks in your consulting room and you can number of times diagnose that this lady has an osteomalacia.
Thank you, sir. Okay, now we will have some other x-rays ahead, but we will just look at some x-rays of the tumors. So I would like to tell you a few things about what to look or what you're supposed to look when you're looking at a x-ray of a tumor or a tumorous lesion. So first thing that you look at, these are basically these are about 8 or 10 criteria described by Daphner. So they are known as the Daphner's criteria. Daphner is a radiologist in New York University, and these are the criteria that he has described about reading or how you look at a X-ray of a tumorous lesion. So first thing you look at the nature of bone destruction. So as you know, there are 3 types of bone destruction that you commonly come across. Geographic, which is again type 1, 2 and 3. Next is a geographic, moth-eaten and permeative. So geographic is again 1, 2, 3, moth-eaten and permeative. These are the 3 types of bone destruction that you have to look at. So you look at bone destruction. Next is the zone of transition. So whether the zone of transition from the tumorous lesion to the normal bone, whether it is a narrow zone of transition, then it is likely to be a benign lesion, or if it's a wide zone of transmission, then it's a aggressive or a malignant type of lesion. Okay? Penetration of cortex or joint by the lesion, whether there is a penetration of the cortex or it is a still encased lesion where it has not gone outside the cortex or into a joint. Next thing you look at is the periosteal reaction, which can be again of 3 types, which is solid, seen in osteoid osteoma or low-grade infections, lamellated or a spiculated type, which is a sunburst appearance which is commonly seen in the osteomosarcomas. Then you look at the behavior of the lesion, whether it is osteolytic, osteoblastic, or it's a mixed type of lesion. Okay. Then what type of matrix is being produced, whether it's an osteoid matrix or a chondroid matrix or a mixed type of matrix. Then you look at the locus of the lesion within the bone, whether it is epiphyseal, whether it is metaphyseal or diaphyseal. So if you look at a tumorous lesion in all of these perspectives, then each of this will give you some clue as to what the probable diagnosis of the tumor is. So locus of the tumor, like epiphyseal tumor. So what are the most common epiphyseal tumors that you come across? Chondroblastoma and GCT, giant cell tumor. Okay. Technically, giant cell tumor is, it starts in the metaphyseal area and then progresses to the epiphyseal area. But yes, it is commonly seen in the epiphyseal area. So chondroblastoma and giant cell tumor. So if the tumor location of the tumor is in the epiphyseal region, then it will shorten your list of differential diagnosis. Okay. Then again, age or maturity of the skeleton. Again, depending on that, you will get a clue as to what the probable diagnosis is. Margin of the lesion, that is, whether it's a sharp margin or it's a poorly defined margin. If it's a sharp margin, then it is a benign or a slow growing tumor. If it's a poorly defined margin, then it's a malignant or an aggressive tumor. Shape of the lesion inside the bone, whether it is oblong or longer than wider. Okay, if the tumor or the lytic or the growth is going along the diaphysis, it is more long than it is wide, then it is likely to be a slow growing or a benign type of lesion. And if it is wider than longer, that the lower end of the bone is expanding, or inside the tumor is expanding and it is wider than longer, then it is likely to be an aggressive tumor. So this is a picture which has been given in the this is from Mercer's orthopedic textbook. So this will give you the type of tumors that are commonly seen in the areas. So you don't have to take a photograph. Basically, it's a Mercer textbook picture. So you understood how you look at a tumor lesion, the Daphna's criteria, okay? Age of the patient, the location of the tumor, the margins, the nature of destruction, the type of the destruction, whether it is longer or wider, the type of matrix, whether it is osteoid, chondroid or mixed, and the type of destruction, whether it is lytic, osteoblastic, lytic or mixed. So these are the things that you look at. So I think we'll start with a couple of X-rays. Okay, who wants to take it?
So it's a plain radiograph of ATVO showing the distal and radius ulna carpal bone. The X-ray shows a lighted lesion in the distal and radius. Probably cervical diagnosis.
First describe the lesion. Don't jump to the diagnosis here. You have not even described the lesion completely. Don't jump to the diagnosis.
See, you have to go
Systematically.
That this is a matured skeleton. Then you describe the location of the mass.
Then the location.
Then you describe the appearance of the tumor. And then you come to the diagnosis.
The lesion is in the epiphyseal region. Eccentrically, it is eccentric and extensile.
Yeah.
And has a soap bubble appearance.
Okay.
The margins are poorly defined.
I would call it poorly defined margins. Fairly well defined margins.
Then you have to describe the zone of transition. How is the zone of transition?
Zone of transition is narrow. There is no articular margin is still intact. Probably I am not sure about this area, but most of the articular margin is intact. So probably it has not breached the joint and gone out. Here it is okay. Probably here there is a breach in the cortex, and on the lateral side, on the radial side there is probably a breach in the cortex, and it has come out of the bone. What is this? Multiple septae. You call it multiple septae are seen inside the lesion. There is no calcification. So it is a lytic type of lesion and there is no calcification inside the lesion. So looking at all these findings and the location of the lesion, what is the probable diagnosis? Giant cell tumor. Any differential diagnosis for giant cell tumor? Aneurysmal bone cyst. Unicameral bone cyst won't look like this. So you can't see unicameral bone cyst in this. This is classical either giant cell or a ABC. So okay, again. So
One differential is non-ossifying fibroma.
yeah, but location non-ossifying fibroma will be either metaphyseal and location wise.
Basically, non-ossifying fibroma in a matured skeleton is,
Not clear.
when it is in a pediatric age group, you can think in terms of non-ossifying fibroma. But usually it is on a cortical area. It doesn't have involvement of the epiphysis. When you go to the epiphyseal area,
Very few differentials
very few
actually.
differential diagnoses are left. In a matured skeleton, epiphyseal tumor, 90% of the times you will be seeing a GCT.
GCT or a chondroblastoma. Okay, so it's a benign osteolytic tumor filled with giant cells, seen in adults, common size being around the knee and the lower end of radius. GCT, remember the 5 E's. It is epiphyseal in location, eccentrically located, expanthile in nature, eggshell cracking appearance, and extended curettage with or without bone grafting is a ideal management. Okay, so 5 E's in the giant cell tumor. Recurrence rate 30%. When we were students or when we were learning, it used to be 30-40%. But now I am told that the with the extended curettage and the rest of the things, the recurrence has come down to, like what recently I was talking to Dr. Panchwal, and it said it is less than 10% now, the recurrence rate of GCTs. Advances in treatment are denosumab injections, which is an RANKL inhibitor, and injection zoledronic acid, which is given in 3 injections. Denosumab injections again given subcutaneously, and it is supposed to reduce the lytic appearance of the tumor and
It reduces the size of the
size
tumor
of the
also
tumor.
drastically.
and it helps in new bone deposition. So denosumab is of late is being used extensively, and malignant transformation is in 30% of cases. Okay.
Somebody may ask you if it has already broken into the soft tissues, especially at this site, lower into the radius. What will be the treatment option?
First, right, first give denosumab injection and
No, I am asking about treatment options. It is extremely rare to get metastasis into the chest from a GCT.
Local
But local recurrence is possible if there is already a soft tissue involvement because of the breakage of the border. So in these situations, what is the modality which is used nowadays by many oncosurgeons?
first give denosumab injection. First give denosumab injection and reduce the size of the lesion, and then by polydocanol injection.
Then?
Polydocanol injection, curettage and
Polydocanol not here. Polydocanol is a sclerosant. We use that in ABC.
Yeah. See, one of the modality which is used by many oncosurgeons now is what is called as an ulnar translocation. What they do is that instead of doing the scraping, putting bone graft, and then keeping the risk of recurrence, you look at the tumor in the MRI, you know what is the intramedullary extension. You keep a safe margin, excise that much of bone along with whatever little soft tissues are getting involved, and then you cut the ulna at the same level where you have excised the radius, and along with the soft tissues attached, you move the ulna in line with the radius, take out the cartilage of the distal end of the ulna, and do a fusion of the wrist joint, and then put a plate which will be extending right from the radius. It will cover part of the ulna and will go on to the third metacarpal, and you fuse the wrist. Most of the patients are not given even a plaster if you get a good stability on the table, and the patient gets excellent pronation supination. While doing this fusion, you just give about 10 to 15 degrees of dorsiflexion, and the functional results are superb in these cases. So this is one of the modality which has been used by the oncosurgeons quite commonly nowadays for the lower end of radius. You can go and actually go through the literature, and I have myself seen about 3 cases in my own hospital. I have done one myself, I have seen 2 being done by the oncosurgeons, and I think any one of us, if you see once or twice, you can do this surgery, and it's a very rewarding surgery. The patient can go back to even a laborer's work without any problem. If you do scraping bone grafting, and you do, previously we have done the ipsilateral fibula upper end replacement over
we used
there.
to do that in the past.
I have done a couple of cases of that, but in none of these cases you can get that good a function. This particular modality gives excellent function, excellent strength into the wrist and the hand, and the patient has hardly any disability because of the fusion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And basically what you need to remember is the more times that if after the recurrence, the more number of times that you operate, the chances of it getting malignant transformation goes up after repeated surgery like curettage and bone graftings. Okay. Okay. Yeah, you.
except scale will measure person with the right full length femur and proximal tibia and knee joint. In the distal femur region, it shows in the metaphyseal region it shows centric non-expansile expansile lesion with the narrow margins. The nature of the cyst is lytic, and first differential it shows on the lateral it shows septate. So my first differential diagnosis will be
Wait, something else you've not commented on.
soft tissue involvement is not there.
Okay. Anything about the cortex?
Cortex involvement is not there. It's not crossing the physis.
Very good. Yeah, so that almost completes the description of the tumor, because these things you have to keep on repeatedly saying, otherwise you will miss them. Breach in the cortex, breach in the epiphysis, breach in the articular surface, involvement of soft tissues, the lesion, you have described the lesion, but these things are also important to be said. Okay, now the diagnosis.
First differential diagnosis will be aneurysmal bone cyst. Second differential diagnosis will be unicameral bone cyst.
Okay. So basically, aneurysmal bone cyst, it's a misnomer. It is a misnomer because it is neither a cyst nor it is an aneurysm. Okay. So what is an aneurysm? So basically, it's a blood vessel. Abnormal dilatation due to the weakness in the vessel wall, mainly arterial. Okay. So that is aneurysm. So this is not an aneurysm, and it is not a cyst because there is no endothelial lining to this tumor. So this is a misnomer, aneurysmal bone cyst. It's an expansile tumor-like lesion with fibrous septate filled with blood. Okay. Biopsy is a must because the most important differential diagnosis is a telangiectatic osteosarcoma. Is the important differential. So you need to have a biopsy before you go ahead and just scrape and bone graft. Whatever you do, you need to have a histopath diagnosis. Management is curettage with or without bone graft. Recurrence rate is more than 50%. So here you use a polydocanol injection. Okay. So successive 3 injection of polydocanol leads to a more than 90% cure rate, it is said. Second is unicameral bone cyst. So again, it's a non-neoplastic lytic expansile fluid filled lesion in the metaphyseal location, usually found in less than 20 years of age, active and latent. So what do you mean by an active UBC and a latent ABC? Yeah, UBC. What is active and what is latent? So basically, an active lesion is the one where there is no bridge of metaphyseal bone between the epiphysis and the lesion or the cyst. When the epiphyseal area is of the epiphyseal plate is separated from the lesion with a rim of a metaphyseal bone, then that is known as a latent lesion. And when there is no such separation, it is known as a active lesion. What is the fallen leaf sign? Not the fibrous. It's a pathological fracture in the cortical fragments when they fall inside the cavity. You can see them in the X-ray, and that is known as a fallen leaf sign. So management, aspiration and injection prednisolone about 200 mg inside the cavity. They are usually therapeutic. They heal. Okay. Anything else, sir?
Many a times, these patients get fracture, and that fracture itself works as a treatment. Whenever they get a small crack, you just immobilize them and the cyst automatically heals.
Next. Yeah, come on.
So, brain structure of category immature, right side, knee joint shoulder, basal joint of femur and part of the periostal.
Okay, anybody else wants to try? Anybody else wants to try? You?
quick.
So plain X-ray of a skeletally mature patient showing the right femur. In the distal end of the right femur, there is a periosteal reaction with the lytic, not lytic, osteoblastic cavity showing
Describe this. It's a tumor basically. So what kind of a tumor? It is an engulfing tumor.
osteoblastic.
Yeah, it's an osteoblastic tumor because there is a lot of new bone formation. What is this? Hartmann's triangle. There is a triangular periosteal reaction here. Okay. Then there is a lot of new bone formation. It is a tumor which is engulfing the distal end of the femur in the metaphyseal region. Okay. Yes. Anything else?
Sunburst appearance.
Well, I won't call this classic sunburst appearance because this is basically all this is a new bone formation. Classic sunburst appearance, I don't know if I have an X-ray, I would have shown you. Yes?
Osteosarcoma.
For the cortex, is there anything, any pathological fracture? There is no pathological fracture. Is there involvement of the joint or epiphysis? No. See, standard, you have to just rattle out these things one after the other. Okay, so what's your diagnosis? Osteosarcoma. Okay, what type of osteosarcoma? Parosteal osteosarcoma. So this is basically, that's what I was trying to point out to you. It's a tumor which is outside the bone. It is engulfing the distal end of the bone. So it is a parosteal type of osteogenic sarcoma. So as you know, OGS or osteogenic sarcoma is a malignant type of osteoid forming tumor affecting the young adults in the second or the third decade of life, arising from the transformed mesenchymal cells, usually arising at the metaphyseal area. Parosteal, what is peculiar about the parosteal osteogenic sarcoma is that it's a low grade of, in the various types of osteogenic sarcoma, parosteal osteogenic sarcoma is a low grade sarcoma and arises from the outer layer of the periosteum. Metaphyseal in origin, there is female predominance as against the standard osteogenic sarcoma. And so this basically it's a low grade malignancy, so better results with therapy, and it has got a 95% of long term survival. In 25% of cases there is involvement of the medulla, wherein the cortex is breached and the tumor goes inside the medulla. Okay, this is just a tip. This recent issue, January-February 2018 of Indian Journal of Orthopedics. If you can lay your hands on this, just get this and read it. This is a special issue only on bone tumors. Dr. Ajay Puri from Tata Hospital, he has been the guest editor for this, and he has compiled this entire issue. And some beautiful articles on giant cell tumor, chondroblastoma, malignancy. When I went through it, basically even I realized some things which I didn't know, like a simple thing like when you say it's a, say in case of a chondroblastoma, basically chondroblastoma is a benign tumor, but when you say a malignant chondroblastoma and malignant transformation of a chondroblastoma, so what does, there are two different terminologies. When you say it's a malignant chondroblastoma, what you mean actually it's a locally aggressive chondroblastoma of a benign nature, or a chondroblastoma which is of benign nature which metastasizes outside the primary site. So that is a malignant chondroblastoma, and malignant transformation of a chondroblastoma means that there is sarcomatous changes which have transformed the benign tumor into a malignant tumor. So it's an excellent issue. I think all of you should try to get it and read this. It will clear a lot of your concepts about GCT, chondroblastoma, and a lot of other tumors. Ajay Puri has edited this and compiled this. Okay, I think we'll just, do we want to continue or we stop here? It's past 6 o'clock. Okay, last one. Come on. You take it.
The anterior, posterior, and the lateral X-ray of the elbow of a skeletally immature patient, pre-operative and post-operative. There is a supracondylar fracture which is operated with the help of close reduction, K-wire and cast and slab. So it is extension type of fracture.
Classification.
Plain type 3.
So, is there a difference of opinion? Gartland type? 2. Okay. Gartland type 2. Okay. Now comment on the fixation. Anybody?
Reduction is rotated.
What is the mode of fixation?
The close reduction and K-wire fixation.
Close reduction, we don't know whether it is closed or open. How can we do? Basically, it is reduction with fixation with K-wires. So, what is the configuration of wires? Two lateral and one medial. Okay. So, it is a good configuration or what?
Lateral wire should be parallel.
Good. That is what I wanted all of you to point out. Basically, this configuration is a good configuration. Two lateral and one medial is a good configuration if the fracture is of a unstable nature. But the lateral wires, okay, the lateral wires, they should not converge near the fracture. They should either be parallel to each other or they should be divergent, because that will give the best stability. Okay. Secondly, when you are putting this, you should be careful to protect the ulnar nerve. You should either make a small incision and put a spike or something above the ulnar nerve and then pass, or you should be confident enough that you will not transfix the ulnar nerve along with the fracture. So, this is a good thing. Anything in this here, what you can see here?
Fat pad.
Okay, yeah, that's a posterior fat pad sign. It's a very important sign that you look for in the elbow. It's a posterior fat pad sign. It's very classical sign here. Very rarely you get to see this kind of a classic posterior fat pad sign. Okay, so Gartland's type, how does the Gartland classification go? How many types are there?
3.
3 or 4?
4.
Pakka? Okay, tell me what are 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 is
Undisplaced.
Undisplaced fracture.
undisplaced. 2 is intact posterior. Anterior cortex is broken, posterior cortex is intact. Okay. 3
Type is
Completely
anterior posterior
displaced.
cortex is broken, but the posterior periosteum is intact.
and 4
Fourth is
Flexion type.
the periosteum is also broken. The gross instability, multidirectional instability,
not multidirectional.
anterior posterior instability.
Yeah, so basically it is extension as well as flexion. It is unstable in extension and flexion both. So what is important to know is that Gartland's type 4 you cannot classify on the X-ray or pre-operatively. So it is an intra-operative classification. During, when you are actually doing the reduction or fixing it, at that time you will come to know that an extension type of fracture, when you try to reduce it, becomes unstable in flexion. It goes in flexion. So it is unstable in both directions. So Gartland's type 4 is an intraoperative classification. You cannot classify it on the X-ray. So this fracture was a very unstable fracture, because if you see there is on the medial side also there is some amount of crushing of the bone. So that is why we decided to put a medial pin. Medial pin, usually 2 lateral pins are sufficient in a supracondylar fracture, but if there is a medial comminution or if there is a medial crushing of the bone or medially the fracture is unstable, then it is advisable to put a medial pin. Okay? Sir, anything to add? Okay. Yeah, when you are conserving, again, if you are considering or putting a plaster, then you put the elbow in more than 90 degrees of flexion. At the same time, you look for radial pulse. Then you go beyond, when you flex the elbow beyond 90. So this is how the fat pad sign looks. So this is the fat, this is normal X-ray. This is the fat, and this is the capsule, joint capsule. So whenever there is a fracture or an injury here, there is collection of blood here anteriorly or posteriorly, and this blood collection, when it is there, this fat gets lifted off the bone here. Okay, this is the anterior and this is the posterior fat pad. So when there is blood collection here inside the joint because of the injury or fracture, this fat gets lifted off, and that is seen like this here. See, here you can see anterior as well as the posterior fat pad. Okay, and here the injury is not here. There is a slight fracture of the radial head, but just because of the hemarthrosis or collection of the blood inside the joint, the fat pads get lifted like this. So whenever there is a not a very gross fracture, you can see this, and if you can see this, then you should suspect that there is some intra-articular injury or fracture. Okay, so this is this. You should remember this. This X-ray is extremely important for all exam going students. These are the ossification centers around the elbow, and these are the two important lines: the anterior humeral line and the proximal radial line. So the anterior humeral line in the normal, this thing goes through the capitulum, usually in the 1/3 to 2/3 junction of the capitulum, and the proximal radial line, if you draw, it goes through the center of the capitulum. Okay, so these things you should remember when you are seeing the X-ray of a pediatric elbow. I think we should stop here, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Madhav, for a wonderful I'm also very grateful to Dr. and Dr. Shindre for taking a lot of trouble to come here from a long distance and give it us in the last hour. Thank you. With this, our program comes to an end. I hope you will, we will be sending an electronic feedback form to all. So I hope you will respond in letter